First story. My son is facing the consequences of his actions after I kicked him out of my house for abandoning his children. Now he got arrested, won't be out soon, and he is begging me to get him out, apologizing. But I couldn't give it SHT, favoring his girlfriend. This situation has had me a bit confused. So one of my neighbors suggested I post it here. I, 55, have 2 children, George, 31, and Gabrielle, 29. Gabrielle recently got engaged, and I am helping her plan the wedding in my spare time, which the entire family is very excited for, except for George. George recently divorced his wife of 7 years, Susanna 28F, after he said the spark had gone out. They have a set of twins together, Amy and Alice 6F. And we are trying to set up a healthy co-parenting relationship. Susanna is a great mother to my grandkids, and I was disappointed in George for giving up so fast on their relationship without even trying couples counseling. But it wasn't my business or place to say anything. The drama started when George brought his new girlfriend to dinner at my house. He met his girlfriend Bethany 25F through a work colleague, and they have been dating for 4 months. At dinner, Gabrielle and I were discussing flower arrangements, and Bethany felt the need to ask George if he'd ever marry again. George coughed before replying that he'd have to think about it, which Bethany seemed to deflate at. Well, this caused Alice to cry about how she wants mommy and daddy to love each other again. George and Bethany just sat there while my granddaughter screamed. After I comforted Alice, I pulled George aside and asked if he was sure about Bethany, which he told me was none of my business. I told him it was my business who he invited into my home and my grandchildren's lives, since I've been caring for them in my spare time while he works. He and Susanna have 50-50 custody. George got angry and said it was Gabrielle's fault for mentioning weddings in the first place. I told him to stop acting like a child and to be happy for his sister. Then Bethany felt the need to insert herself and tell me that she and George were together, no matter how much I liked his ex-wife. After that, I was done with the conversation and asked them both to leave. George and Bethany stormed off, flipped me the bird, and left my grandchildren at my house at 7 p.m. I had to call Susanna to collect the children since they had school in the morning, and I was attending a cake tasting with Gabrielle the next day. I feel like I shouldn't have to tell my 31-year-old son to be happy for his sister or argue with a random woman whom I have never met before in my own home. So AITA. Relevant comments. George needs to pay for daycare for a while. The truth is George can't afford daycare with the child support and alimony he owes Susanna. I agreed to babysit my grandchildren as a favor to him. I love my grandchildren. But I wish George would appreciate the thousands of dollars I'm saving him each month. Just quite watching them, and he'll come crawling back. I would if I thought he could afford it. We might disagree, but I don't want my son to be homeless. Maybe they need to rethink the custody agreement if he can't care for them. If Susanna took on more custody, then George would owe her more child support, which he's already struggling to afford. Plus, it would mean that Susanna would have to work part-time hours, which isn't really an option in her industry. Alice needs counseling. My husband and I have suggested that George pay for her to get some counseling, but he keeps saying that he needs to save and can't afford it. What exactly were you asking when you asked if he was sure about Bethany? I was asking if it was really the right time to introduce her to the family, since his daughters are still sensitive about the divorce and are trying to come to terms with it. I didn't ask him in the context of, is Bethany right for you? I meant it as, are you sure this is the right time to introduce her? I didn't inherently dislike Bethany, but maybe it would have been better to introduce her to my grandkids after they've recovered from the divorce. Did George ask if he could bring Bethany beforehand? George asked me if Bethany could come 20 minutes before he was supposed to arrive. So it's not like I could say no at that point. OP is voted NTA. Update same post. Next day. I didn't expect this post to gain so much attention, and I want to thank everyone who gave their honest opinions and helpful suggestions. This situation happened a few hours ago, and I thought it was right to make an update. Bethany came to my house to apologize for how she acted at dinner last week. She told me that she was 2 months pregnant and George had broken up with her after she told him, because he has too much responsibility and didn't want to be in the baby's life. I then spent the better part of 3 hours talking with Bethany about the baby and what she wants. She says she wants to keep the baby, even if George refuses to be in its life. And I told her that I would help with childcare if she needs it since she doesn't have any family that lives nearby. Before I got angry with George, I thought I would call him and give him a chance to explain. George was angry that Bethany had shown up at my house and insisted that it wasn't his baby. I told him that he should get a paternity test. and he asked me for $500 to cover it since he's struggling. I told George that he needs to figure it out himself since he's about to be a father of 3, and that he better step up and do right by his kids. George then hung up. Well, 2 hours later, I get a call from Susanna to say that George hadn't picked up the kids like he'd previously agreed to, and could she drop them at my place because she had work. I agreed for her to drop Amy and Alice off and tried to call George again. I called 12 times, and they all went to voice message. I don't know where George is and have called his place of employment to try to find out. However, they refuse to tell me anything. I've agreed to watch Amy and Alice until Wednesday, and Susanna has reported this incident to CPS. I assume she plans to file for full custody, and I can't blame her. Right now, I'm worried that George has run off somewhere or done something irresponsible. I am disgusted and will not be doing him any favors in the future, unless he has a very good explanation and accepts some responsibility. This was hard to write, but felt good to get off my chest. Thank you everyone for responding to my first post. Relevant comments. Heavily downvoted comment, but I liked OP's response. Commenter. Hey, OP, you're disappointed in your son for giving up on his marriage so easily, and I'll bet dollars to donuts that you and your dill have been telling the twins that mommy and daddy are getting back together. I bet you asked your granddaughter to say something like that to help daddy realize that it would make everyone happy. You need to butt out of your children's personal lives and get a damn hobby. OP, you owe me quite a few donuts, then, since you're dead wrong. I'll poke my nose in my son's business when he's being an irresponsible parent and not taking accountability for his children. Bethany is pregnant. It's his time to have the twins, and he's nowhere to be found. It just proves to me I should have made his personal life even more of my business. Alice caused drama, and you exacerbated it by asking about Bethany. Alice is 6 years old. She hardly meant to cause drama, as you put it. She's a 6-year-old little girl who doesn't understand why her parents no longer live together. I never asked George if he was sure about Bethany in the context of, is she the one? I meant it in the context of, is he sure he's making the right choice to introduce her to the family so soon? Since his own daughter clearly isn't ready to think of her dad marrying someone else yet. I don't care who George ends up dating, but he has children to think about, and my granddaughters need to come before any random woman he's been seeing for 4 months. New update post. Okay, so I made the original post about 2 months ago, and since then things have been a bit crazy lately, so I just wanted to update as I had people asking if George was okay. In my first post, people suggested I give George some space and time to figure things out as a recently divorced father. But after he ran off around 2 months ago, I ended up filing a missing persons report. I talked to George's workplace the day after I filed the report, and they told me he had given his 2 weeks about a month ago. I then tried calling George again, and he finally picked up. He told me he was okay, but he had moved states and no longer wanted any contact with his children because it was all too much responsibility for him. I snapped at George and told him he couldn't just decide now he didn't want to be a father. Then George told me he never wanted kids in the first place, and those kids don't look anything like me anyway. George then told me to F off and hung up the call. After that, I informed the police department what had happened to let them know George wasn't in any danger and that we knew his whereabouts. After that happened, I just cried because I couldn't believe I had raised such a selfish person. Susanna has filed for full custody, and George, as far as I know, is refusing to pay child support and will probably end up in jail at some point. Bethany is now 4 months pregnant and is having a boy, and George is the father. Somehow he managed to come up with the $500, so he will have to pay child support since he doesn't plan on being in the baby's life. Bethany moved into my home in November since she's had trouble doing things herself, and her doctor says she's at risk of preeclampsia if she becomes too stressed during the pregnancy. In that time, we have gotten closer, and despite how our first meeting went, I actually have come to like Bethany. Sorry, this isn't the happy ending some of you were expecting. I have been following the advice I received from the first post and have not contacted George, and he has not tried to contact me. I can only hope with time he pulls himself together and manages to step up as a father. Again, thank you to everyone who gave helpful advice. I'm not sure if I will be updating further, however. Relevant comments. I guess we can only hope George steps up. I'm sorry. Thank you. It's been hard for our family to cope with George being so irresponsible, and I have been in and out of the hospital for the past 2 weeks due to the stress of the whole situation. I hope George steps up, though he hasn't even sent Christmas gifts for his children. Definitely worth looking into therapy for yourself and your family. My husband and I are looking into funding some family therapy and individual therapy for the twins. But we're waiting to see if our health insurance will cover it. Why does Bethany want to keep this pregnancy? Bethany is convinced that George will change his mind once the baby is born, which I have tried to tell her probably won't be the case. But Bethany is convinced he will, and no one can tell her otherwise. Update post. 6 months later. Almost 8 from the OG post. Hi Reddit. It's been over 6 months since my last update after I completely forgot about this account. Much has happened in that amount of time, so as requested, here is the update. Well, first of all, Gabrielle is now married to her amazing fiancé, and I couldn't be more proud. The wedding was a small family affair at his parents' farm. George did not attend the wedding, but it was a beautiful ceremony all the same. Bethany has given birth to a healthy baby boy and has found an apartment and a new job. I am so proud of her for how well she is coping with everything. As suggested in my last post, we did get the twins therapy, and it has helped them heal throughout this whole process. After George took off and abandoned his children, our whole family needed time to heal and recover from the hurt and trauma. As for George, that's a messy situation. Roughly 4 months ago, George was found to be in possession of illegal substances and was arrested. When George first called me from the county jail, I thought he was trying to get money out of my husband and me. However, it just got worse and worse. He asked me to pay for a lawyer, and I explained that because of his actions, I couldn't afford to help him and that I couldn't trust him. George just sobbed and started apologizing for all he had done. I told him it was his kids he should be apologizing to. He kept sobbing and then told me there was another woman pregnant with his child. At first I didn't believe him, but then he gave details, and I looked her up on Facebook. There was a picture of them as the profile picture. I hung up on him, disgusted yet still feeling somewhat responsible for what he has become. It was a few days later that we heard from George again, and he told us his trial was in 2 months. He sounded so scared, but part of me thought this was what he needed to learn consequences. Though I felt disgusted at my thoughts, since he's still my son who I raised. My husband and I decided to attend the trial, even though it was in the next state. We felt we had to for our son and peace of mind. I told Susanna and Bethany, and they were bewildered, declining to attend. At the trial, George was found guilty of all counts, including criminal damage, robbery, and failure to pay child support. The judge gave him 6 years with no plea deal due to evidence. I didn't know how to feel. My grandkids won't see their dad for 6 years. It's been 4 months, and I'm still confused. George calls daily, crying, apologizing, and begging us to get him out and to speak to his kids, which I've declined since Susanna hasn't given permission. Bethany decided to make no contact with him or her son. I haven't reached out to his other girlfriend either, so I'm unsure how to feel. This was depressing, but I'm glad I updated. Thank you for reading. This is probably my last post. I hope we can recover and heal from this. Relevant comment. Commenter. As a mom, although we raise them, we are not responsible for their actions as adults. We may be part of why certain emotional or mental tendencies exist, but they are the ones that make the choices about what they are going to do in their lives and what repercussions they will be responsible for. I just read through all 3 of your posts, and please stop beating yourself up. He needs to face the reality of the mess he created, all on his own, okay? So the women who slept with him without protection have a hand in the baby creation. The rest of it, including the jail time, is all the result of choices and actions that only he owns. OP. I really needed to hear that. It's just that when your son becomes a felon, people tend to blame their upbringing. I can't help but think about what I could have done differently. Second story. I ran into my ex-wife's sister, and she asked me out on a date. Now, my ex-wife wants to contact me and have a talk. TLDR. I'm a 28M. I recently ran into my ex-wife's sister Riley 24F at the grocery store, and after talking with her and sort of catching up, she ended up asking me out on a date, and I'm not sure how I feel about it. Quick background. My ex-wife is the same age as me, and I have not seen her since we divorced 3 years ago. There was nothing juicy about the divorce, just 2 kids who got married too young, too soon, and realized it too late. We divorced pretty amicably, and she ended up moving away. I did as well for a time, but I ended up coming back home last year. I had no idea what my ex was doing and didn't really care. I got along with her family until the end. Although I did not know her sister that well since either we were in college or she was in college away from us. But I obviously had met her several times and had a cordial relationship with her. I never felt any weird vibes while married to her sister. My ex was not really close with her sister, but they also did not have any ill will toward each other. Anyway, she told me that my ex is engaged and happy, which I was actually happy to hear. She said her parents are doing well, and they even asked her a little while ago if she knew what I was doing, which she didn't because I don't keep in contact with anyone from her family. Kind of wanted a clean break, you know. Me and my ex do have some mutual friends, but I don't think Riley really knows them that well. It was a nice conversation. Before we finished talking, Riley asked me if I would like to have a drink with her sometime. I thought maybe she just wanted to catch up in a better setting more so than two people leaning on shopping carts. But then she said, "But I understand if you don't want to go on a date with your ex-wife's sister." So it's a date. I did end up exchanging numbers with her, asking her kind of lightly how her parents would feel and getting they would probably be happy that I found someone they liked. I figured I would rather have the number and not use it than wonder if I should have gotten it. I don't know. I guess I was also just happy that an attractive woman asked me for my number. She did mention in our conversation, before she asked me out, that she was always surprised that her sister let such a good guy go, which I corrected her and told her was definitely mutual, not all on my ex. Riley is very pretty. I enjoyed talking to her, and I like her family. They also always liked me. If I had just run into her as a stranger, and there was no history, if I'm being honest, it would have made my day to have been asked that. But I keep thinking that it's weird, like, she's obviously a grown woman now. But she was a teenager when I started dating my ex-wife, as I said. I didn't see her all that much, so no, this is not a grooming situation. I would feel weird going to her parents, almost being like, "Hey, I decided to give your other daughter a try." Then how would my ex feel about it? Would it ruin her relationship with her sister? And if we got serious, I'd have to see my ex-wife at functions, which I don't care that much about, but it's still odd, you know? Then I got these intrusive thoughts like, is this my unconscious trying to make my failed marriage seem like a success? Then there's like, what if Riley had the same tendencies that made you and your ex incompatible? But I feel like I'm also not being fair to Riley. Riley has a great family. She seems to have her stuff together. She was enjoyable to talk to. I feel like I could be allowing my past to throw away a potentially great partner. I don't know. I'm really confused. Help me. Edit 1. I can't post an official update yet, so here's the best I can do. I have read through your comments, taking my lashings from some and gotten some weird, creepy personal messages from others who, as one person put it, understood why I wanted to knock boots with my ex's sister. In fact, it was the creepy, pro messages that actually changed my mind more than the people telling me not to go on the date, though some of you against it also made some great points. I texted Riley and told her that I don't think it is appropriate for us to go on a date. I told her that I enjoyed talking to her and catching up, but that we should only be cordial if we see each other out, but nothing more. Maybe I shouldn't have said this, but I also told her that it is nothing personal against her, that she seems like a really great person, but given my history with her sister, it just isn't appropriate. She replied that she understood and respected my decision, but also said that she didn't think my ex-wife would have a problem with it. But I was steadfast and said I still don't think it's appropriate. I also learned a lot about myself here. And if you read some of my comments, you might have seen this, but I'll try to summarize. I miss being a husband. I miss being in a loving marriage. I don't miss my ex-wife, but I miss what we once had, and I want that again with someone else. I didn't know I felt that way, at least consciously, until I spoke to Riley. I think her being my ex-wife's sister brought out some feelings in me that were never unlocked by the women I went on dates with in the interim, because they were detached enough from my previous marriage that I could still repress those feelings. I didn't realize how lonely I was, and how much I craved having a woman that I could come home to, and not just receive love, but give it. I think I focused so much on my career and other things in my life that I buried those feelings after my divorce. Finally, call me dumb, naive, oblivious, emotionally unintelligent, etc. But I'm not a bad person, and I never intended to destroy anyone's relationships. I also was not thinking about as ex thinking with my DCK. Asterisk, if you see some of my replies, I didn't even think of some of the conundrums there. I was thinking with a heart that confused scar tissue with being healed. As for Riley, I don't know what her intentions were, and at this point I don't care. I am not going on that date with her. I'm going to talk to a professional about my unresolved love issues, and I want to thank everyone here for opening up my eyes. Even if you were a jerk, except the person who basically accused me of being a PD, you can F off. Edit 2. I'm going to bed. I have been up way too late with this and drank too many beers, more than a long time. I have tried to respond as best I can. People who didn't even read the whole thing, I don't care about your opinion. People who did and offered up stuff. Even if I didn't like it. Thanks for your input. This thing has blown up so much, I'll give you all an update if anything else of note transpires. Update. This turned out so freaking long. I don't blame anyone not wanting to read all of that. Okay, wow, good God. This became a whole arse SHT show. I really believed I was being optimistic, thinking my previous post might get 50 comments. It's like 2,000 now or something. I think it was number 1 on the page for an entire day. A very sarcastic, woohoo. I saw the damn thing on YouTube, for God's sake. I have never felt so out of touch and dumb. I am in a much better headspace now. If I had written this last week, it would have been pretty dark. A lot has transpired in such a short period of time, so I will do my best to keep it chronological. But if I jump ahead or lose track, forgive me. I'm not going to recap anything from my last post. Go back and read it if you want. Also, I'm sure you all assumed this, but all of these names are fake. The post wasn't, but boy, I wish it were. Just to be clear, I'm going to use a lot of quotes. These are to the best of my recollection. I didn't have a stenographer. Also, I want to give a shout out to all the commenters and the people who DM me. I did not respond to any of you. I don't know. I wanted to keep some distance from this getting more personal than it already is. I did respond to one because they put a ton of effort into it, and it was very thoughtful, but I read them and appreciated them. I especially appreciated those of you who also missed being a wife or husband. You were seen and heard, and it made me feel less alone there. Thank you. Finally, I may be dumb, but good Lord, some of you are just depraved. I may have some work to do, but some of you are the worst. After the post got swamped, I went out and bought some beer because I was kind of freaking out. I drank almost an entire 12-pack, and I'm not a drinker, so that does a number on me. 2 beers get me pretty buzzed. I think I was up until 1 in the morning or something. I ended up calling off work because I was very tired and hungover. I also read some of my comments, and I was kind of a jerk in some of them. I was drunk. I'm not a mean drunk, but I guess I was feeling pretty exhausted and F it. I owe some of those people an apology. The next day I got a text from Riley with a link to the post. WTF. I now know what it is like to have a bowling ball dropped on your stomach. My divorce was such a slow burn that I never experienced that gut-punching feeling, at least not to this level. Maybe gut-punching. I should have said, cannonball to the face. I'll spare you the entire text conversation, not for your sake, but for mine. Apparently Riley is no stranger to Reddit, and she was gobsmacked when she read my post and immediately knew it was me. I finally called her, and the first couple of minutes involved crying and tongue lashings, although not as bad as I was anticipating. I tried to explain to Riley that I did not think the post would blow up like that, and I was genuinely confused at the situation and didn't feel like I had anyone to talk to about it. I apologized profusely, and thankfully she leveled out a bit, and we were able to have a civil conversation. Riley told me that she wasn't overly upset with me, still a little upset with me, and she understood why I made the post. She admitted that asking me out was a stupid thing to do, her words. What really hurt her was how many people thought she was trying to undermine or cause pain for her sister, which she assured me and asked me to assure everyone was absolutely not the case. But she acknowledged that looking back on it, she understood why people might have felt that way. But it really hurt her to see people say such nasty things about her. And I have to admit that it hurt me too. But I also have to admit that so many people said it. It caused some doubt in me. I'm now kind of ashamed of that. Riley is not a bad person, and I'm going to provide more on this in a bit. Riley called me after she had called her sister, my ex-wife Julia. We need to give her a name, to do some damage control. She basically begged and pleaded with Julia not to be mad at her. Julia, to her credit, handled it very well. A lot of these conversations are pretty redundant, so I'm trying to condense them as best I can. A quick aside. What a lot of you don't understand is that we are all human beings here. I think what a lot of people on here do is they take the worst example of someone they heard about in different posts and project that person's motives or demeanor onto someone like Riley. What some of you also don't understand is that my ex-wife, Riley, her family, and I have a lot of history, 99% of which you do not know about. Nor do you have any idea what the dynamics are. And you oversimplify these situations without nuance. I get it. You were working with what I gave you. But maybe try not to completely SHT on someone you don't know or assign nefarious motives to them because you read a horror story about a different person in a different post. I will explain this in more detail, and hopefully some of you will understand that Riley is not a bad person, and she was not trying to compete or get over on her sister. In fact, the person who advocated against these ideas the most outside of Riley was her sister, my ex-wife. Riley, and I eventually had a good conversation. I told her that I understand if she's pissed at me and never wants to see or hear from me again. But to my surprise, she said that she had mostly forgiven me. And despite how hurtful a lot of your comments were, it did sink in that what she did was a little effed up. We had a moment of commiseration when she said that when people mentioned things about the two of us that were explicitly sexual, she had also not gotten that far in her mind, and reading them was as jarring as I found them. We both laughed about how we were so naive not to even consider that aspect of a potential relationship. No offense, she said to me, but the more I think about it, the more gross I realize it is. I'll get into this more in the next conversation, which was Riley telling me that Julia's ex-wife wanted to call and talk to me. In my mind, I gulped, but I figured I deserved it from both barrels, so I told her that I was okay with that. After we hung up, maybe 5 minutes or so later, I got a text from an unknown number, but it was made clear in the message it was my ex-wife. She said she wanted to talk to me face to face, but since she lived 2 hours away, she couldn't just drive up here, although she did eventually. We'll get into that later. She suggested Skype or Zoom. I agreed to do that. She said the only condition on her end was that her fiancé, Tom, would be listening into the entire conversation. But she assured me that Tom mostly wanted to stay out of it, smart man. She said the only reason was that she was not comfortable having a conversation with her ex-husband behind her fiancé's back, which I understood. A couple hours later, I fired up the laptop and got on Skype. There on the call was my ex-wife. She hadn't changed much at all, though her hair was lighter than I remember. I had not seen or spoken to this woman in 3 years. Looking back, and to my delight, while it was a bit surreal to be talking with her, I did not have any flood of feelings when I saw her. I didn't have any, oh my God, I still love her, revelations. Thank God, because after everything that had transpired, I was no longer sure of myself on anything. But there she was, in the screen flash. I wasn't sure I would ever see her again after our divorce. When she saw me, she smiled and waved. I think there was a hi, or something like that. Then she leaned into the screen. You're an idiot. I put my hand over my eyes and groaned. Thankfully, I could hear her giggling. I finished my game of peekaboo to see her smiling and shaking her head. If I didn't know you so well, I would want to effing strangle you. I told her I deserved that. She called her boyfriend over. She introduced me to him. It was a bit awkward. Tom seemed in good spirits. He was a handsome guy. I apologized to him and assured him that I wasn't here for anything underhanded. He put up his arms and said, "The less I'm involved, the better." I almost left this part out because I'm already chapped enough that some people think this is fake. And it seems like a creative writing comment. But F it, I don't care. Tom, with a sly grin, said, I asked Julia if I should thank you for divorcing her, but she didn't think that was funny. She slapped his shoulder and replied, Do you want to sit on the couch now or sleep on it later? Tom leaned in and said, Nice meeting you, before scurrying off. Julia told me that he didn't want to be a part of this, and that it was actually her insistence he listen in. What followed next was a bit of a whirlwind. I'm going to do my best here to summarize, and full disclosure, there are going to be some things relating to why we divorced, yes. We talked about that in depth as well that I am not going to include here because it isn't for any of you. But I can say, regarding those conversations, I never realized how much I would value the closure I got from that. First, regarding Riley. Not only was Julia not angry with Riley, she said she wasn't even surprised. I was taken aback by this. It's not that Julia didn't blow her top. That isn't very surprising since Julia is pretty good at regulating her emotions. But to say she almost expected it was something I wasn't expecting. I started to wonder if Riley wasn't being honest with me, if some of you were correct that there was some weird sibling rivalry thing going on here. And I almost wished there was, because the truth was even more difficult for me to process. Julia said that, had Riley done this immediately after our divorce, she would have slapped her silly. But having a few years away from the divorce, she was able to process what was going on. And I discovered things I never knew about both Julia and Riley. I feel like it will make more sense if I start with Julia. And she had read the Reddit post, including all of my comments. She said I might be surprised to learn that she had already gone through the same emotions I was going through. And it was not a small part of the reason she wanted to talk to me. Because despite everything, she did care for me enough to want me to find happiness. And I know I expressed the same about her in my last post. She said a couple months after our divorce was finalized, she went through a brief period where she thought she had made a terrible mistake. She had moved away, did not have as many people to talk to, and became very depressed and lonely. She said that one time was so bad she had a panic attack while talking about it with one of her friends. And if not for the old paper bag breathing technique, she would have hyperventilated. She also nearly got a hold of me to ask if I would take her back. She said she saw a picture of me with another woman, and it set her off. I found out it was an innocuous Facebook post with a platonic coworker. Her friend insisted that she get into therapy, which she did, and she discovered that it was not me she missed. It was having a companion. She doubled down on my seeking therapy because she said it enabled her to move on. She said after reading what I had written, it felt like déjà vu, and she wanted me to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. She had obviously told Tom all of this well before we had that conversation. I'm also only typing the next part because I feel like I can already hear, "Run, Tom, run," in the comments. Julia had asked Tom if he was okay with her sharing that with me, and if not, we would stick to Riley. But Tom said that she might as well get it all out there, and after reading my post, he felt bad for me, kind of emasculating. But I put myself in this position, haha. We talked about our divorce. This actually isn't chronological, but it seems like the best part of the narrative to place it. As I said, a lot of that I'm not going to share. But I mentioned in my last post that sometimes Julia would be okay with something even when she wasn't. She admitted that she had a problem doing this and has worked on it since. That she and Tom communicate much better, and our problems were not entirely my fault. She said that she could be a bit jaded and cynical. But she also said that for my part, I was entirely too naive and optimistic about everything. She said that she loved how positive my outlook was and how I always saw the best in everything and everyone when we were first together. But eventually, as she put it, when we got out of college and life happened, there were moments where she felt I was almost dismissive of her feelings because I had the mantra of, everything will work out in the end. Or if she had an issue with someone, she felt my optimism would make it seem like I was taking that person's side. Are you sure they meant it that way? She said that sometimes she just wanted her husband to be mad with her and not try to play peacekeeper. She also said that I was, and I'll own this, and I think many of you saw it firsthand, and it has already been brought up in my first therapy session. Awful at picking up cues. I won't forget this line. My parents' dog could tell I was upset, and you couldn't. OP, do you understand how frustrating it is when you have to spell everything out to your husband? Do you know how exhausting that is? She said that even when she did, she saw previous criticism, so she felt like even when she tried to communicate with me, I was too caught up in trying to find every little silver lining that I was tone deaf to her feelings. Finally, regarding this, she accepted some responsibility there. My biggest mistake was never spelling that out to you. I tried to spare your feelings too many times, and in doing so, I was putting a bandage on an amputation. She said that part of what prevented her from doing that was that she felt I was such a pure soul that she felt like conveying that would somehow corrupt me. That I would become jaded and cynical like her. That was really hard to hear, but I needed to hear it. Some of you suspected that I was almost childishly oblivious, and you weren't entirely wrong. In fact, I think I was pretty curt with someone over that, and to some extent, I probably owe them an apology, although I still don't think their particular critique was entirely in good faith. If I'm wrong about both of those, then I'm sorry. And believe me, I apologize to her as well. This is long. On to Riley. Julia said Riley and I were actually a lot alike in that respect. Riley, in her opinion, was also naive and trusting to a fault. I learned some things here as well. Apparently, Riley looked up to me as a husband way more than I ever realized. Julia said she always knew Riley had a little crush on me. Not in the sense, according to Julia, that she wanted me for herself, but she always enjoyed being around me. And she suspects that because we share some similarities with our personality traits, Riley pictured someone like me as the ideal husband. When Julia and I were around people, we really were the perfect couple. People were very surprised to hear about our divorce because all of our problems were internal. We did not fight in public or around anyone else. Also, since Riley did not see us all the time, she was getting a very truncated version of our marriage, and it always looked great. Julia said that Riley would talk about how nice and funny I was, how well I treated her Julia, and how she knew Julia could trust me, and even in our rocky stages, Julia never had the heart to tell Riley that it eventually became a facade. Julia said, and she admits this was also a mistake, that she wanted Riley to view me in that way, with the hopes that she would find a nice guy herself. And if Riley learned about my flaws, she might feel like her picture of a good man would be shattered, and she might end up with someone who treated her like SHT. Julia told me that while a guy like me turned out not to be right for her, he would probably be great for her little sister. Because her sister was always bubbly and optimistic like me, she thought this at the time. But she admits later she was wrong about that. She even gave me an anecdote that Riley was dating a guy in college, and he did something pretty shitty, she couldn't remember what. And Riley asked her, would OP do something like that? Julia told her that I wouldn't. And the next week, when Julia spoke with Riley again, she found out Riley had dumped him. I asked her if she really thought that had something to do with it. Julia laughed and said, you still don't get it. I guess I can see what she was saying. Someone in the last post kind of called all of this bravo to you. Julia said that Riley has since had some relationships that were extremely toxic. Because, as she said, Riley was easy to take advantage of, because she always tried to make the best of everything, which in turn made her, at times, a bit of a doormat. Julia warned me that I was susceptible to this as well. And I was lucky I had avoided it. Her guess was that Riley saw me. And between her picture of me as this perfect husband, along with her string of bad relationships, it made her feel like dating me would ensure that she would finally have the good husband she always wanted. Julia felt like Riley was so excited, and while she hated to say this, desperate to find Mr. Right, that she did not even think about what dating her ex-brother-in-law might entail. She chalked it up to Riley having tunnel vision, or horse blinders. Julia laughed, telling me that with her conversation with Riley, she was somewhat shocked at how little her sister had thought that through. She said that even I, in my post, had considered things that had not sunk in for Riley. She also chastised me a bit. She hated the line in my post paraphrased because I'm too lazy to quote it. My ex-wife and her sister were not that close. Julia said this was another glaring example of how oblivious I was, since she felt like she and Riley were always very close sisters. And she said it was even out of character for me to believe that, since my default would be believing everyone was best friends. I told her that I knew they texted, but they didn't hang out a lot, to which, and my God, what an idiot I am. Haha, she replied. She was going to college a few states away, you dumbbars. When were we supposed to hang out? She pointed out that I even mentioned that in my own damned post. I really am a man baby, haha. No wonder she divorced me. So, maybe me and Riley should date after all, right? No chance, haha. Julia said that while, if she really thought that it would be best for Riley, she could accept it. She wouldn't like it, but she could accept it. Julia said I badly needed therapy. So did Riley for that matter. And I guess that's underway. But Julia felt like we would just enable each other's naivete. And while this is harsh, she said that our relationship, as is, would become so juvenile that eventually, when either of us needed the other to be the adult in the room, we would not be capable of providing that for one another. And we both would probably become bitter and resentful. She felt that while Julia and I were incompatible because we weren't enough alike, Riley and I would never work because we were too alike. She said that she and Tom were alike enough to share a lot of the same interests and understand each other's needs. But they had enough differences that they could complement one another and introduce new or different dynamics to the relationship to help it mature and grow. She felt like Riley and I would be a honeymoon and a crash and burn, not a slow burn like us, but a ticking time bomb. She felt it would quickly stagnate. She also said that, selfishly, her words, on her end, she feared if things between me and Riley didn't work, Riley might resent her. Why did you let me date him? He isn't over you, etc. I asked about Mill and Phil. I'm not going to say X, because that's just tedious what they would think. Julia said that she felt if she gave an enthusiastic blessing, they would probably be happy for us. But she was not capable of doing that. So Mill and Phil would likewise not be happy with the relationship because they would hate the tension it could cause between their two girls. She said one thing I wasn't wrong about was that her father and mother did think very highly of me. But she told me that once again, I was only focusing on the best case scenario and seemed to be oblivious or aloof to the harmony they would obviously want with regards to their two daughters' relationship with one another. I did, in the last post, come to that realization, though I can't say I did it alone. I was also told by Julia to put this in the post. I, Julia, know my sister better than you do. And I know that while what she did was ill-conceived, I know she didn't mean me any harm. If you want to continue to believe that she did, knock yourself out. Julia also wanted me to mention that she does not believe I groomed Riley in any way, and she also knows I never cheated on her physically or emotionally. She even joked, if some woman ever wanted you to cheat, you probably wouldn't even pick up on it. Thanks for that backhanded compliment, Julia, haha. I mentioned this in the last post, but if you all understood the logistics, I wouldn't have even had the opportunity. Finally, she basically told me to go to therapy, don't date for a few months while going, and focus on healing myself. She assured me, Tom in the room, that overall I was a wonderful man who would make someone very happy because I had more positive traits than negative ones. But she said that I had some growing up to do before that time, so I didn't repeat the same mistakes I made with her. though she reiterated our divorce was a two-way street. She also had a lot of growing up to do at that time. Last weekend, to cap it off, we had an ex-family meeting. This was done in person, at Mill and Phil's house. It was really nice to see them, and they were very welcoming, although Phil pulled me aside, shook his head, and said, "Why in the hell did you think it was a good idea to get the opinions of a bunch of idiots on the internet?" While I understood his point, I'll defend you guys. You all were very helpful. It was me, Julia, and Tom. Apparently Tom also wanted out of this one, but Julia insisted. Haha, poor Tom, Riley, and Mill and Phil. I'll save some time and space. Partially because I'm sick of typing, but also because most of what we talked about I already covered. The biggest revelation here is that Mill confessed that part of this might have been her fault. She said that she loved Tom and was excited for him to be in the family. But in the interim of our divorce and Julia and Tom getting serious, Mill would sometimes bring up to Riley that it was a shame OP and Julia couldn't work it out, and things like, "He was such a nice man. I hope he is doing okay." She said that while she never told Riley to try and date me or even hinted at it, looking back, she might have signaled to Riley that she and Phil would love to have OP back in the family. She said she never meant any harm by it, but she probably should have let me go instead of bringing me up in those contexts, no matter how well-meaning they were. Phil then said that he remembered telling Riley years ago, as a joke half-joke IMO, that he was sad he was going to lose his fishing buddy. That was something me and Phil did a lot. And he said maybe he should have done the same and not said anything. Riley, for her part, said that she did have the feeling that Mill and Phil would be excited for her to date me. But she apologized to Julia because she felt that she was only thinking about herself and her parents, and it was inexcusable how little she considered her sister. She said that she foolishly thought that Julia would be over it, and how insensitive and dismissive that feeling was. I opened up to all of them and said that I was guilty of the same, and I should have been much more in tune with the potential blowback than I was. I should have known what a bad idea it was from the start, but I had a bunch of baggage I wasn't even aware of. I also apologized for the Reddit post and said that had I just gone to therapy to share it there, I could have saved all of us a lot of pain. By the end, we all hugged. I even hugged Tom. Poor Tom. Phil, in his jolly old way, said, "Well, I have 2 daughters I couldn't be more proud of. I'm excited to welcome a wonderful son-in-law to the family. And OP, you're going to make someone a great husband someday." Julia even pulled me aside later and said, "If you ever want to go fishing with my dad, I'm okay with that. He could really use his fishing buddy back." I know it's a corny ending, but damn it, that almost brought a tear to my eye. I didn't ask him there, but I am going to keep it on the back burner. This is going to be it. I'm so done with this. I learned a lot about myself, and I need a lot of therapy. Riley and I will be friendly if we see each other, but we won't be dating. I might go fishing with Phil sometime, but I'm going to wait until this all dies down. I wish Julia and Tom the best, and while I have no pretenses that I'll be invited to their wedding, we ended on good terms, and I got a lot of closure. I really do hope they have a happy and healthy life. I also know that one day I'll find the right person too. It just won't be from that family. TLDR, Riley found this post, called my ex-wife upset, and my ex-wife called me. We spoke about our divorce, Riley, and we got a lot of closure. Met with Mill and Phil and hashed everything out. The end. I am so done with this. Thank you for watching the video. If you are interested in listening to these kinds of stories, we've got more in store for you. Simply subscribe to our channel, hit the like button, and share it with your friends.